Miles away from any other human civilization, hidden away in the Indian Ocean, this isolated island is home to a group of people that want nothing to do with the rest of the world. That's because this island and the people living on it aren't just any other normal people. This is Sentinel Island, and it's the home of the Sentinelese, an indigenous native tribe that has willingly chosen to deny contact with the outside world for thousands of years. And if anything or anyone ever tries to get onto this island, they will all be met with the same deadly fate. Sentinel Island is located in the Andaman and Nicobar archipelago off the coast of India. The island is about the size of Manhattan, New York, and the group living on the island have been traced all the way back to ancient times. Some evidence has been discovered to make scientists believe that they may have been in isolation since the Stone Age, making them one of, if not the oldest culture in Earth's history. Trying to find an accurate number for their population on the island is a whole mystery in and of itself. The Sentinelese are estimated to be a group of people between 50 and 200 individuals. In 1971, India estimated the population to be around 82. In 1981, they recorded about 100 total people, but in 2014, researchers concluded that there were 6 females and 7 males on the island in total, all under the age of 40, along with 3 younger children no older than 4 years old. And a handbook titled The Anthropological Survey of India estimated that the population is between 100 and 150 people. The Sentinelese people are said to be related to other indigenous groups in the area, but because they've been isolated for so long, tribes from the Andaman Islands such as the Onge and the Jarawa can't even understand the Sentinelese language anymore. They are an ancient tribe civilization that survives purely as hunter-gatherers. They don't use any technology or know of any advanced tools. They carve their own spears and bows and arrows as weapons to hunt wildlife on the island. They use basic methods to catch local seafood as well. Mollusks/snails are abundant in that area, and so this was believed to be their main food source. They are so uncivilized that they don't even have an agricultural system in place, as in they don't grow any of their own food. Their diet consists of just things that they can hunt or gather on the island. Based on a single visit to a Sentinelese village in 1967, it is known that they live in huts with roofs that are slanted, all facing each other. They each have fires outside of each one, although it is unclear if they still use the same methods today. There have also been sightings of small, narrow canoes that are maneuvered in the water with long poles. These canoes are not used to travel outside of the island, but instead to go to the deeper waters slightly past their coastline to fish and harvest crabs. As gatherers, they also rely on the fruits that grow wild on the island, although it's unclear what exactly is natural to the area. One night in 1771, a ship from the East India Company passed by Sentinel Island and saw lights on the shore. The ship was on a mapping mission, so it didn't stop, and the Sentinelese stayed undisturbed for almost 100 years. Then, in 1867, an Indian merchant ship called the Nineveh got stuck on the reef right next to the island. The 86 passengers and 20 crew members swam to the beach and stayed there for 3 days until the Sentinelese decided it was time for them to leave, using bows and iron-tipped arrows to make their point. The passengers and crew of the Nineveh fought desperately for 3 days using sticks and stones, creating a tense standoff. They fought knowing they may not have a way off the island, but then a Royal Navy ship arrived. When rescued, the captain said, quote, "The savages were perfectly naked with short hair and red painted noses and were opening their mouths, making sound. Their arrows appeared to be tipped with iron." Briefly, the British actually claimed Sentinel Island, something that was important to the British. Not much happened during the British ownership, other than rescuing those from the Nineveh. In 1880, Maurice Vidal Portman, a young Royal Navy officer, took control of the surrounding areas, the Andaman and Nicobar colony. He believed he was an anthropologist, and so he decided to take his own group to North Sentinel Island. He planned on capturing and studying the Sentinelese people, whether they wanted to be or not. Portman took his crew onto the island, but were not greeted with weapons or sticks or bows and arrows. Instead, they came across an empty beach and empty huts. They realized that the Sentinelese likely saw the big group coming, so they fled in towards the forest of the island. However, Portman and his team captured an elderly couple and 4 children who couldn't escape in time. They took them to Port Blair, the colonial capital on South Andaman Island. Sadly, all 6 became very sick, and the elderly couple died in Port Blair. Portman then decided to return the 4 sick children to North Sentinel Island, leaving them on the beach with some gifts. We don't know if these children spread their illness to their people, or told stories of how these outsiders killed their parents. But the experience definitely didn't make the Sentinelese friendly towards outsiders, and it was after this that something changed in the people of North Sentinel Island. In 1896, an escaped convict tried to flee the Great Andaman Island penal colony on a raft. He managed to escape, but unfortunately for him, he ended up on North Sentinel Island. It's unknown exactly how his initial interaction came about, but we do know the result. A few days later, a search party found his body. It was covered in arrow wounds and his throat was cut. The scene was terrifying, a clear warning from the Sentinelese. The British knew they had to stay away, and for over 100 years, they did just that. In 1956, the Indian government made it illegal to travel to the island and any approach closer than 5 miles in order to protect the remaining tribal community from mainland infectious diseases against which they likely have no acquired immunity. A few years later, an anthropologist, Triloknath Pandit, and his team, working for the Indian government, visited North Sentinel Island. They found huts abandoned with fires still burning. They left gifts like cloth, candy, and plastic buckets. Unfortunately, the naval officers and Indian police with them stole bows, arrows, baskets, and other items from the empty homes, despite the protests from the anthropologists. This wasn't a good look for the outside world. The Sentinelese already didn't like anyone or anything around them, and the Indian police were not doing any favors for the rest of the world. Pandit and his team kept trying to make contact by leaving gifts like coconuts and then quickly leaving. The Sentinelese didn't like live pigs or plastic toys and buried them, but they loved metal pots and pans and coconuts. These visits went on for 25 years, with bows and arrows often pointed at the visitors. Pandit believed that over time, they were slowly gaining the trust of the Sentinelese. The visits were irregular until 1981, and in 1974 a National Geographic crew joined, and the director got an arrow in his thigh. Through these regular visits, Pandit and his team saw small signs of progress. The Sentinelese began to approach the beach without weapons and accepted gifts more calmly. They even ventured closer to the visitors. Despite these improvements, the Sentinelese still made it clear when it was time for the outsiders to leave, sometimes signaling with knives. This delicate relationship showed that while some trust had been built, the Sentinelese still valued their privacy and independence. Eventually, the visits stopped around 1997. Pandit and his team are the only known people on Earth to ever have friendly contact with the people on North Sentinel Island. Almost every other recorded contact with the Sentinelese has ended in death. Things quieted down now that Pandit could no longer visit the island. That was until December 26, 2004. That's because this was the date of an earthquake that shook the Indian Ocean. The earthquake caused a massive tsunami to ravage the Indian Ocean. It caused so much damage, and around 230,000 people died in just a few hours. This disaster was one of the worst ever. Scientists say it was like exploding 23,000 Hiroshima bombs all at once. Surely people on a small island with no earthquake or tsunami shelters couldn't survive, right? Well, 3 days after the disaster, the Indian government sent a helicopter around the ocean to check out the damage and check around for survivors. The helicopter hovered closely to North Sentinel Island when all of a sudden it was struck by something hard. It wasn't raining, and there wasn't any debris large enough that would have been picked up by the wind to hit the helicopter and make that noise. That's when the small crew realized that the Sentinel people were shooting arrows and throwing spears and stones at the helicopters. That's when they realized the Sentinelese somehow adapted to the island. The island has coral reefs and elevated areas all over the island, which may have helped shield the tribe from the earthquake. They also probably built their own shelters, and although they were not filled with advanced technology, they lived in the natural habitat of the island for so long, they probably prepared for such a disaster. The island was mostly intact, with only tribal fishing grounds disturbed by the quake. The craziest part is that they attacked the helicopter to not only show that they had survived the earthquake, but also to communicate to the Indian government that they didn't want any help. 2 years later, in January 2006, they would continue to show how much they didn't want any part of the outside world. Sundar Raj and Pandit Tiwari, 2 Indian fishermen, were fishing in the ocean just like they normally would. They were minding their own business when their boat accidentally drifted into prohibited waters surrounding the island. Unlucky enough for the fishermen, they drifted onto the last island they would ever see. The Sentinelese, acting in defense of their territory, attacked and killed the fishermen. We aren't sure how exactly the Sentinel people reacted, but it did not take long for the bodies of the fishermen to be found. The incident sparked a debate and raised concerns about the safety and legal implications of interactions with the Sentinelese. Despite the tragic outcome, there were no prosecutions or legal actions taken against the tribe due to their isolated and protected status under Indian law. The authorities face challenges in enforcing regulations in such remote and sensitive areas. The reason why this is surprising is because the bodies of the fishermen were found, but never recovered. That's because the bodies were hooked to stakes and displayed on the island as scarecrows. It was a warning to anyone who washed up on the shore of the Sentinelese again, warning them about what would happen if they crossed the coastline again. But this wouldn't be the last time someone tried to step foot on the island. This all started in 1991 when John Allen Chow was born in Scottsboro, Alabama. He grew up in Vancouver, Washington, and attended Vancouver Christian High School, where he grew up admiring explorers and missionaries. He attended Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma, where he managed their soccer team, and he graduated cum laude in 2014 with a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science. He grew up a normal, intelligent man who had a long, bright, successful life ahead of him. He participated in 2 missionary trips, traveling to Mexico, South Africa, and Iraqi Kurdistan in 2015 and 2016, where he spread Christianity. In 2017, he attended a boot camp for missionary training in Kansas City. This is where a mock native village was used in the training, and the staff pretended to be hostile natives. It was here when John Chow learned about the Sentinelese. Although he was advised against it, he had already made up his mind. He would try to convert the Sentinelese people. He spent a year preparing for his trip, knowing that it may end poorly for him. He was a man of faith and courage, and he tried his very best. In October 2018, he traveled to Port Blair, India, where he prepared a contact kit that included photos, gifts, and medical equipment. The Indian government had just promoted tourism by removing certain islands from being off-limits to the public, but Sentinel Island was not one of them. Despite this new government policy, John continued his mission. In November, he made his first trip to North Sentinel Island. He was hoping to contact and even live among the Sentinelese. He vaccinated himself, quarantined himself, and took on countless hours of training waiting for his moment. But the Indian government still were not going to allow Chow to travel on his own, so he found his own way to the island. John paid 2 fishermen the equivalent of about $400 to take him near the island. He took a canoe and went to the island himself. The fishermen warned Chow not to go, even though he already paid them. He ignored them and went anyways. The fisherman stayed close to John as he went towards the island, and only left after his final attempt to visit the island. They were then later arrested when they got away from Sentinel Island, leaving John Chow all alone. John rowed to shore, hoping that he could share his waterproof Bible with the Sentinel people. They immediately attacked him and he turned around. John tried again, and the second time he tried going towards the side of the island, the Sentinel people were less hostile. John first tried to sing worship songs to them, and he attempted to speak to them in Xhosa, a language spoken in South Africa, but his songs and words fell on deaf ears. The Sentinel people then began to speak, but then Chow thought they were cursing him. He wrote all of his interactions down in a diary. Before he went to the island, one entry stated, quote, "Lord, is this island Satan's stronghold, where none have heard or even had the chance to hear your name? The eternal lives of this tribe at hand, I think it's worthwhile to declare Jesus to these people. Please do not be angry at them or God if I get killed. Don't retrieve my body." John Chow knew that his time on the island was going to be short. He wrote down that the Sentinel people communicated with high-pitched sounds and gestures. John wrote down in his final entry that he tried to give the Sentinelese fish and gifts, but then a boy shot a metal-headed arrow that pierced his Bible, and he ran away. This was when John instructed the fishermen to leave him, and this was the last time anyone would see John Chow alive. The fishermen described the sight of the Sentinelese dragging Chow's body across the beach, where they saw his body being buried on the shore the next day, never to be recovered. Despite all the efforts by Indian authorities, Chow's body couldn't be found. They tried many times to get it back, but had to stop trying. An anthropologist working on the case said that the risk of a dangerous clash with the islanders was too great to keep going. Because of his death, they opened a murder case to investigate what happened. But no one has ventured back to North Sentinel Island since, as the Sentinelese have sent their message to the world countless times. And even though we are curious about them, maybe they were just meant to be left alone after all.